Hey everyone, welcome back. We're going deep today into Chris Butler and the Science of Identity Foundation.
Oh yeah, this one's going to be interesting.
This is a story that, well, it's got everything.
Yeah, from what I've read, I mean, talk about a wild ride.
We've got articles, we've got stories from people who used to be members. We even have some of Butler's own teachings.
That's a real mixed bag.
And it kind of paints this picture of a guy who went from living a pretty normal life to,
And living in the lap of luxury, basically.
yeah, with tons of money and followers who are like super devoted.
Yeah, bordering on fanatical even, maybe.
So today we're going to try to figure out what's really going on with this group.
You can pack it all, yeah.
Yeah, peel back those layers. So to start, Butler's early life was, pretty ordinary.
Seems that way, at least on the surface.
But then something changed, and he went from simple to extravagant, like chef's devoted followers, the whole 9 yards.
It's pretty striking, the transformation, isn't it? And then you've got the way his followers act like they practically worship him.
I know we're talking kissing his feet, drinking his bathwater, even eating his toenail clippings like it's some kind of holy food.
It's intense. And what's even weirder is that he's supposed to be really sensitive to, like, everyday stuff. Perfumes, cleaning products.
Oh, yeah. And there's that story about Mike Gabbard, the politician. Well, apparently he got really into air and water purification systems.
Seems like he was trying to accommodate Butler's sensitivities.
Exactly. Like on one hand, you have this almost godlike reverence, and on the other hand, he has these very specific and kind of mundane needs.
It's a strange mix, for sure. You have to wonder what's going on in his head and what makes people so devoted to him.
Is it faith? A need to belong? Or is there something more manipulative at play?
Good questions. There's a story about Butler refusing this big airport farewell. He wanted to leave quietly, but then he supposedly complained about not having air purifiers on the plane.
Uh-huh. So much for humility, huh?
Makes you think it, doesn't it? Like maybe humility's for his followers, not for him.
Yeah, and then there's his wife, Wailana. Apparently she had to work in their garage because their 2-bedroom apartment wasn't big enough.
Wait, what? Even though Butler's supposedly loaded?
Yeah, it's a head-scratcher for sure. And then on top of that, there are these accusations that he was demanding double donations from his followers.
So where's all that money going? It definitely makes you question the financial side of this organization.
Right, and it's interesting because despite all these controversies and accusations, he's never actually been charged with any crimes.
Unlike some other gurus who've gotten into legal trouble.
That's true. But there's still a lot to unpack here, especially about how the Science of Identity Foundation actually operates.
Yeah, they seem to be pretty secretive, particularly when it comes to what they call Guru Tattva, which basically means knowledge about the guru.
And access to that knowledge is very tightly controlled within the group?
Could be a way to control the narrative and squash any dissenting voices, don't you think?
Maybe. And speaking of dissenting voices, things get really interesting when you look at how they treat former members.
Right, they get labeled as demonic or traitors just for leaving.
Talk about creating a climate of fear.
Totally. It's like any attempt to question or challenge their teachings is met with serious backlash.
It's almost as if they use fear to maintain control. And there's this concept they use called ovinyan zarektre, which means blaming someone for the reaction they provoke.
Classic manipulation tactic. If someone raises concerns instead of addressing them, they just blame the person for causing trouble.
It's a way to shut down dissent and discourage people from thinking critically.
And it's not just verbal either. There's this one example of a former member, Madhai Das, who left to join a different group. He was basically ostracized and even physically attacked, according to some sources.
That's pretty disturbing. It makes you question their whole deal about enlightenment and self-discovery.
Yeah, is it really about that, or is it about power and control?
One of the sources we have talks about this idea of supersession based on changing circumstances, meaning that genuine spiritual practices should change over time.
Right. But it seems like Butler's group is stuck in the past, just clinging to these rigid traditions without questioning if they still make sense.
Like they're stuck in a time warp. And then there's this whole issue of their superficial Orientalism.
Yeah, are they really embracing Eastern teachings or just using the aesthetics for their own benefit? It's an important question.
And then, of course, there's the whole political angle. We can't ignore the fact that Tulsi Gabbard and her family are deeply involved with Butler and the Science of Identity Foundation.
What does that say about the group's potential influence on politics? It's something to think about, for sure.
And it's not just about Tulsi. There's a story from a former member who said they felt like a spiritual project for the group.
So is it about individual growth or about molding people to fit a certain mold? Makes you wonder.
Then there's the tragic case of a child's death in Poland within a family linked to the group, which was actually investigated by authorities.
Definitely raises concerns about their practices and their impact on vulnerable people, especially with all the accusations of controlling behavior.
And speaking of control, it seems like the Science of Identity Foundation has changed tactics in some countries. They're operating under different names like Skua Meditacji, Samorilizaji, or Mantra.pl.
Could be a way to avoid scrutiny while doing the same things under the radar.
Yeah,
Pretty strategic, if you ask me.
seems like there's a lot more to this story than meets the eye.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's like an onion with all these layers.
We've covered a lot, but we're just getting started. Next time, we'll dig into some of the more controversial stuff, like the accusations of financial wrongdoing and their connection to a convicted drug dealer.
Stay tuned, folks. It's about to get even more interesting.
See you next time.
It's really a wild story, and it makes you think about spiritual seeking today. Like, what does it all mean?
Yeah, how do we even begin to make sense of this? Where do we draw the line between real faith and just being manipulated?
That's the big question, isn't it? Especially when you're looking into different spiritual paths. I think this deep dive is showing us some red flags, though, things to watch out for.
For sure. Like if a group claims to have all the answers, you got to be a little skeptical, right? Especially if those answers come with a big price tag or require total obedience.
Exactly. Healthy spiritual communities encourage you to think for yourself and to grow. They don't demand blind faith or punish you for disagreeing. They want you to ask questions and respect different views.
And what about this whole thing with them operating under different names in different countries, the decentralization thing? It seems like they're trying to avoid attention.
It does make you wonder, are they changing? Or are they just trying to fly under the radar? It makes it harder for people to know what they're getting into.
It's a good reminder to always do your research before joining any group or following any leader, no matter how charismatic they seem.
Couldn't agree more. Research, ask questions, and trust your gut. If something feels off, don't ignore it.
So what are some red flags we should be looking for?
Well, a big one is a leader who discourages critical thinking or questioning. If you're told not to question the teachings or the leader, that's a huge warning sign. True spiritual growth should help you think for yourself, not just blindly follow someone else.
And we've seen that Butler's group has been accused of pushing members to donate money. How does that fit in?
Financial pressure is another major red flag. If a group demands lots of money or tells members to go into debt to support them, something's not right. Real spiritual teachings shouldn't cost a fortune.
Right. It's about enlightenment, not getting rich.
Exactly. Another tactic we've seen here is isolation. Butler's group has been accused of separating members from their families and friends.
Why is that so common with these kinds of groups?
Isolation is a powerful way to control people. By cutting off contact with the outside world, these groups control what information their members get. They become more dependent on the group for support. It creates an echo chamber where only the leader's voice matters.
So we've got a leader who discourages critical thinking, demands money, and isolates members. That's a pretty clear pattern of manipulation, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. And manipulation can be really subtle. It might start small with little requests or suggestions, but it can slowly escalate until you've given up your independence and you're completely under their control.
Okay, that's kind of scary. So how can we protect ourselves from falling into that trap?
Knowledge is power. Learn about the tactics that these manipulative groups use. There are lots of resources online and in libraries. Learn to recognize the signs of undue influence and unhealthy power dynamics.
And trust your gut. If something feels wrong, don't ignore it. You have the right to question, disagree, and walk away from anything that makes you uncomfortable.
You're absolutely right. Your intuition is powerful, and it's often trying to tell you something important.
And it's important to remember that it's okay to leave a group or a leader even if you've invested a lot of time or money. Sometimes admitting we were wrong is the best thing we can do.
Your well-being is more important than any group or leader. Don't be afraid to put yourself first and make choices that align with your values and your truth.
It's a good reminder that we all have the power to choose who we follow and what we believe. No one should be able to take that away from us.
Exactly. And that power comes with a responsibility to be careful, to think critically, and to speak up when we see something wrong.
So bringing it back to Chris Butler and the Science of Identity Foundation, what are the key takeaways for our listeners? What do you hope they'll remember from this?
I think the most important thing is to remember to think critically when it comes to spiritual seeking. Don't be afraid to ask questions, challenge things, and demand transparency.
And to recognize that true spiritual growth should empower you, not control you.
Right. It should be about connecting with your true self, not trying to fit into someone else's idea of who you should be.
We talked a lot about red flags. What are some green flags, signs of a healthy spiritual community?
A healthy spiritual community is open to dialogue and respect individual choices. They value honesty, accountability, and ethical behavior. There's no pressure to conform or blindly follow the leader. There's a sense of shared purpose and mutual respect.
So this deep dive is about more than just Chris Butler and the Science of Identity Foundation. It's about learning to see those potentially harmful patterns in any group.
Exactly. These dynamics can happen anywhere, from religious groups to political movements to even personal relationships.
It's about recognizing those dynamics and learning to make smart choices about who we trust and what we believe.
And it's about remembering that finding truth and meaning is a journey, not a destination. We're all always growing and learning, and that's okay.
Speaking of growing, remember we mentioned a surprising detail we haven't talked about yet, something that adds a whole new layer to this story.
Oh, yes, that's right. Are you ready for this next twist?
Absolutely. Hit me with it. So what's the twist? What haven't we talked about yet?
We'll remember all that stuff about Butler's wealth and the accusations of financial, you know, shadiness within the group. We talked about those double donations and why Lana working in the garage, even though he's supposedly living large.
Right. It definitely seemed like there were some inconsistencies.
Yeah, exactly. Well, there's this other piece of information that really makes you go, hmm. One of the sources mentions a former member named Patrick Bowler, also known as Paramahamsa Jas.
Mm.
And get this guy was a convicted drug dealer who was part of Butler's inner circle.
Wait, a convicted drug dealer in the inner circle of a spiritual leader. That's a pretty big contradiction. It really throws their whole thing about ethical conduct out the window.
It does, doesn't it? And it makes you wonder what Butler knew. Did he know about Bowler's past? Or was he just choosing to ignore it? And then there's the money Bowler, supposedly donated to the organization. Where did that money come from? And how was it used?
It's kind of disturbing to think that someone involved in criminal activities could be so close to a spiritual leader, maybe even influencing their finances and decisions.
It definitely adds another layer to this whole story. And it shows how important it is to think critically and do your research before you get involved with any group or leader, especially ones that are secretive.
It reminds you that appearances can be deceiving. Just because someone says they're a spiritual authority doesn't mean they're always going to do the right thing. We should always question things, investigate, and trust our gut.
Absolutely. Blind faith can be dangerous. We need to be careful, weigh the evidence, and make our own choices about who we trust and what we believe.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Chris Butler and the Science of Identity Foundation, what are the most important things for our listeners to take away from all this?
Well, I hope this has shown everyone how important critical thinking is when it comes to spiritual seeking. Don't be afraid to ask questions, to challenge things, to demand transparency.
And to remember that real spiritual growth should empower you, not control you.
Exactly. It should be about finding your true self, not conforming to what someone else thinks you should be.
This whole journey into the world of Chris Butler and the Science of Identity Foundation has been really eye-opening. It's a story full of contradictions, complexities, and unanswered questions.
It reminds us that searching for truth and meaning can be a winding road with unexpected twists and turns along the way. And sometimes the most important lessons come from those detours and challenges.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it's given you some things to think about and helped you approach your own spiritual journey with a critical eye and an open mind.